Hello, this is Alyek Gonzalez presenting towards you, and this presentation will be talking about if the introduction of mega sporting events can be a plausible choice in improving a major city's disadvantaged communities. Next slide. There you go. So, some context. Throughout all human history, sports have been a very integral part in world culture. Nearly every single society nowadays has their own little designated game that identifies with them, right? And because of these games, competition started to grow because with growth of the competition, people wanted to find out who was the best in these competitions. Afterwards, as these events grew, after these events grew, they grew from the local level. Afterwards, they grew into a regional level. And nowadays, in the modern world, we have what we call national or international level sporting events, or what we usually refer to them as mega events. Usually, these are like the top tier mega events. So these can include like the Olympics, the Champions League final in Europe, the World Cup that is every 4 years, and the Super Bowl. These mega events usually have a huge impact in this world, and not just like even like the national level competitions. They can have an international impact, just like as the Super Bowl and during February. It doesn't just impact the United States, but impacts the rest of the world. So the introduction of mega sporting events can actually help disadvantaged communities in a major city, because a major city can, first of all, handle it. They don't have to work as hard as a smaller city. But to make this truly work, there has to be three specific ingredients for that to work, or else it's going to turn into a burden. First of all, modern infrastructure needs to be built to host the event, because if it's a world-class, top-tier international event, you can't have broken roads, and you need to build the capacity for that. Afterwards, sustainability needs to be introduced, and economic stimulation has to occur based on if the infrastructure and the sustainability is correct. So with the infrastructure, as I said before, the infrastructure, you need to have modern infrastructure, because a top-tier international events needs and demands that requirement. Additionally, the problem is because in normal situations, a city would not try to resolve their infrastructural problems through the means of improving it, or as I like to say it, they will much rather cover up the problem instead of improving the problem. And because mega events need modern infrastructure, it creates that pressure on the city to not just cover up a problem, but to actually improve. And that needs to happen to also the disadvantaged community. So by that means, the disadvantaged community will receive modern infrastructure. As seen here, in the 2012 Olympics, East London, before the 2012 Olympics, actually, East London was usually considered the poor London, right? Compared to its neighbors or boroughs like Chelsea or Tottenham around there, East London was a mess. It was like a toxic wasteland. But during the Olympics, the planners, they decided that it can be used as an opportunity to not just like cover up, but to actually improve the area of East London. Because as it says here at the bottom, mega events don't just introduce the need to improve, but it also brings the opportunity to revitalize it. But revitalization can only happen through one thing, and that's through sustainable integration. Sustainable integration is needed because if you only have the infrastructure, what will happen afterwards when the event is over? You see, when you plan to build infrastructure, you also need a plan to what to do with it afterwards, correct? And so it's just like a clock. Basically, if there's a broken clock, right? If you have an amazing clock, but there's one piece that's messy, you add a piece that's sustainable, so that piece never has to deal with that issue again. But if you add a small piece, for example, if you add a stadium to an impoverished area, what will happen after the games are finished if you have no plan? The stadium is going to be a white elephant in the city. And that's why a plan is necessary, because with a plan, you can use that stadium to help the impoverished community, to create new events, to create an attraction for people to come. You see, that's why a lot of mega events failed in the past, because of no sustainable integration. You can see some mega events that failed were the Athens 2004 Olympics, the Rio 2016, and even the Brazilian World Cup. And you can see in Athens 2004, the swimming pool area, well, it used to be the former swimming pool competition area, it's just abandoned at this point, and no use is to it. And it actually became an economic burden, not just towards the city of Athens, but towards that new area that they built, designed just for the Olympics. Rio 2016, the Olympics again, the corruption in Rio led to basically a failure in planning, which meant that they built in like impoverished areas trying to make it better, but overall they just destroyed the area because they didn't have any plans on how to use those stadiums to better the impoverished areas in Rio, with the favelas and all that, right? And afterwards, you can see here, it became an economic burden for Rio that they can't even sustain it no more. The Brazilian World Cup has a similar story, but not just in Rio, but even more cities in Brazil, such as Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia, all those places. You see, the process also, you see, when you have integration in mega events, it doesn't just include stadiums also, but it also includes like places like the athletes villages, and also things like the media centers and all that. You see, in London, for example, London, they used the athletes villages, and they had a plan to not just have them as real estate for people, but to actually have it as sustainable and actually affordable real estate, because as I said, East London was a poverty-stricken area. Additionally, because of the sustainability, they planned on using what was the former Olympic event place, right? They used it, and they made it into a park, Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, 2.5 square kilometers of this amazing newly developed area. Now, with new infrastructure and with sustainable infrastructure, with a sustainable plan, what comes next? Economic stimulation. The thing is that these mega events, when the prestige that they bring and the attention they bring to the city, it by itself is an amazing opportunity. And if you can add it with some good infrastructure and some sustainable infrastructural planning, then the opportunities and just like the overall payout that the city will get is through the roof. You can see this in Barcelona. Barcelona was originally like the first city that planned on being sustainable, because as you can see now, Barcelona was the 13th most popular city for tourism in Europe. It used to be surpassed by a lot by Madrid, but nowadays, because of the international recognition that Barcelona got from the Olympics, they got an influx of tourists, right? But just having an influx of tourists isn't going to do anything without some planning. As I said, if you have some planning that would prepare for that influx of tourism and to make the city attractive, basically there will be more attraction. There will be even more attraction from investments from either the private sector or from the public sector, or from retail investors, or from company investors. Conclusion. Afterwards, the mega events bring many opportunities to fix poor communities overall, but but we have, as I said, we need those three ingredients: infrastructure, modern infrastructure, sustainable planning for that infrastructure, and the use for the economic stimulation that will bring the mega event. Knowing knowing these, you need to have these, or else overall the mega event will become a complete burden, not just to the city, but even worse to the impoverished area. It would hurt it even more. And that is the presentation.
I do have two questions for you. First question, what evidence did you gather that you didn't use, and why didn't you use it?
I mostly gathered some evidence from Sydney also in this, right? Sydney was also, it followed in the footsteps of Barcelona, but because of my presentation length, I was afraid that I wasn't gonna make the time limit or that I would have surpassed it much easier. And basically with Sydney, it talked about how they use the athletes village and the stadiums as a way to create a new community by itself, which as I compared to what I presented, that it can like revitalize a community. I couldn't really introduce that new concept of building a complete new community from scratch like that, and mostly just because of time limits.
All right, and what advice would you have for other researchers to consider this topic in the future?
My main advice is that notice you gotta have you gotta think about how the aspects of building a successful mega event brings. Like you can't have one without the other. You gotta always know that it's like cooking like a soup or a stew. A mega event isn't just like, oh, you do this one thing and you're set. It's it's an addition of every single little aspect of every single little thing for in order to bring an entire profit to the city.